Hi, everybody. My name's Will Aldrich. It's great to be with you. Randir and SC, thank you, and to the team at eBay, thank you for hosting this event. The Products That Count community is a really wonderful place where certainly I've reconnected with several old friends and made some new ones. Where I've got, I really appreciate that tonight we are safe from, we've got snacks. We're in a place where we can reflect on some of the good things that have helped us get to where we are right now and maybe think about what we might do to help get to an even better future. So, SC, I do hope to be able to deliver on some of the things that you mentioned about this being, so one way in which this will be a special talk is that it's fairly raw. And also I will ask for your forbearance. When you set out to talk about resilience, I don't know, sometimes when you sort of stick your neck out and you're going to talk about a topic like that, and you're a fortunate white guy, it can seem absurd. So I would ask that, and I know that sometimes when I get to see speakers who don't acknowledge that, the fact that maybe they were born on third base, but and feel or convinced that they hit a triple, I think it's important to kind of approach this kind of a conversation with a spirit that each of us is carrying with us different kinds of challenges, and each of us have overcome different things on our path through our career. And I'm sure that there are people in this room who have traveled farther, overcome more, and have had bigger success than I have. So I'm excited after these short remarks, which I assure you they will be personal. I don't think they've been elevated yet to best practice SC. So in that regard, I've already failed tonight. But what I've really been trying to do is to think about what's in my bag. Have you guys ever seen like a magazine feature or like a YouTube video of like what's in my bag? So for me, one of my rabbit holes is mountain biking. I'm an obsessive mountain biker. And when I get to see like my favorite pro mountain bikers, like what they carry around in their backpacks, I've learned so much from that. So the spirit of tonight is really animated by that. It's a personal reflection on some of the things that saw me through some really hard times in my career over the last few years. So I want to just pause for a moment. I'm going to share a few stories, and I want to be respectful about them because it's interesting. Going through the process of preparing for this talk, it was actually the first time that it really forced me to reflect on some of these really difficult chapters. So let's very quickly sort of move forward. So I started working on the web 22 years ago at CNET when there were 30 million people on the internet at that time. Today there are, just over half of the world's population is now online. And so it's kind of makes my head spin to think about how far we've come as a professional community, as a global community. I think over the last 2 decades, we have unleashed forces that are incredibly positive, and also forces that we don't fully understand yet. So when I thought, why talk about resilience? 2 reasons. One, we're all getting older, right? We're going to be forced to encounter more challenge just by law of large numbers. 2, if the last few years are any indication, or even just the last few decades, the next few decades are when the work actually starts to get hard, right? So I thought that those were 2 reasons why it was worth talking about resilience. Etymologically, so as a word nerd, resilience is sort of, re is again, and silience is to jump back from, right? Can you recover from failure elegantly? And that's something that I've been thinking a lot about over, these last few weeks, for a couple of reasons. So earlier this year, as my team at YouTube was putting together the biggest launch that I've ever been a part of, and I think that many on our team had ever been a part of, this was about 4 months ago, a woman came into the YouTube campus and opened fire on our team, and injuring 3 people before she turned the gun on herself, terrorizing everyone in the building and in the company. And I think many of us, some of you here may know people or friends who were there, and God forbid, people who actually were harmed in that. Thankfully, it's important to note that the 3 people who were injured are recovering. The sort of, it brought me back, the sort of immediate aftermath of that event, in which happened in the building in which I was sitting with a candidate at that time, brought me back to some of the challenges that some of the feelings that we had unearthed a few years ago, back in 2015, May of 2015, when at SurveyMonkey, where I was leading product and design, when our CEO, Dave Goldberg, passed away unexpectedly. So I wanted to unpack some of the things that carried us through that time, and that, again, just a few short months ago, carried us through some of that time. And frankly, we're all still kind of adjusting to what happened and kind of internalizing that. So I want to just really quickly flash. I've been really lucky to be able to work on some products that became household names over time. I don't know if TripIt counts as a household name, but it was certainly a product that I loved getting to work on. When I think about, the chapter at SurveyMonkey was incredibly special to me, and I'm thrilled that there will be some NPS feedback after this as a survey nerd. Heart emoji to you for using SurveyMonkey. Awesome, thank you. I'm not only a fan, and I love the team there, I'm still a shareholder, so thank you for all those reasons. Just full disclosure. I want to ask my own survey question. How many in the audience tonight, I assume, so any product people in the audience tonight? PMs? Designers? Engineers? Okay. How many folks have been working 5 years or less in that field? Nice. What about between 6 and 10 years? What about more than 10 up to 20 years in the field? Anyone else more than 20? Yes. Okay. Awesome. Me too. Connection. Okay. I'm excited to hear how each of you have moved through your experiences. I would also ask that when you see this person making these remarks, and you're reflecting, like, wait a second, he must be a bad luck charm. Like, maybe it's time to actually leave. I think statistically, the odds of another bad event happening right now are low. But again, your mileage may vary. So just keep that sort of. I hope that brings some comfort. I do hope that you guys never encounter crises like these. But also, I think even if you just encounter the merely stressful of day-to-day work, these tactics will hopefully help. So back in May of 2015, SurveyMonkey was at a really important point in its evolution. We were in the middle of hypergrowth. We had scaled, and Selena and Elena have both, I think, spoken at products account events in the past and given great talks about really fascinating parts of their adventure in driving growth and helping to scale SurveyMonkey from roughly, I think, 20 people to, by the time we left, there were about 700, and just an incredible journey to get to support a mission of helping people make better decisions, which I remember vividly the moment when Dave shared the mission of the company with me when we were talking about whether I would join. That made a mark on me. It was back in 2011, and it was in January, if I remember right. That mission made a mark on me then, and it stayed with me. We had started an effort into enterprise sales, and we were in the middle of we were about to confront having to reset our first attempt at that. It was not going the way that we wanted it to. So we were also in the process of evaluating 2 really significant corp dev opportunities, acquiring another smaller company and potentially joining forces with a much larger one. It was a just pivotal moment in the company's trajectory. And then I remember on Saturday at 6 in the morning, I got a call on Selena's phone, and I picked it up, and she was in tears telling me that Dave, our CEO, had just passed unexpectedly. And Dave had, who we had seen the days before, had no signs of any kind of health issues. His kids with Cheryl are my kids' age, and immediately burst into tears and just kind of baffled, and got in the car, went a few blocks over to Selena's neighborhood, and we drove down to the office and just gathered with the rest of the leadership team to kind of to weep together and kind of try to make sense of the of what had just happened. I remember Bennett, who some of the ex-Yahoos may remember, Bennett Porter, who was leading comms for us at the time, just having the horrible responsibility of fielding hundreds and hundreds of inbound calls from people and having to kind of keep it together throughout the day, to tell the story. And the board met and immediately named Xander, from our board, to be interim CEO. And we had this kind of, it began this surreal chapter for all of us. And all of that kind of looming huge work stuff just had to go to the back burner. And we knew that, it was, there were just more important things to tend to. And I think the surreality kind of continued through the week. I remember we went to Dave's funeral, which it was so funny. I knew that Dave knew a lot of people and had a chapter in Hollywood and had, kind of had this other part of his life that, was kind of fancy. His experience with us at SurveyMonkey was very focused, working. Very down to earth, very humble, and occasionally you'd see somebody kind of crazy walk through the office, like, wait, oh, okay, oh yeah, that's right, this is also part of Dave's world. And I remember at the funeral when Bono from U2 performed One, accompanied by an accordion, and we're all just weeping, and just the surreality of it just kind of overtook us all. And just this person who was so down to earth, human and kind, and humble. And also he could effortlessly move in that world too. But we missed him a lot right away, and heard some really moving talks from people around, all the ways in which we would miss him. Obviously, our hearts were broken first and foremost for Cheryl and Dave's family. And one sort of recommended reading is option B. I think Cheryl has channeled so much of her kind of prodigious energy into trying to make sense of this event, which was much more personal, much more impossible to bear, and has done it with, I think, great effect with option B, which is well worth a read to any of us, right, who are going to be encountering challenges going forward. It's really about resilience. It's about this topic. We then had to kind of get back to work, and as we came together as a management team, and I think the culture of humanity first. Dave was very proud of the culture that he and the team that he had built around him had built at SurveyMonkey. He deliberately recruited people who had family commitments. He himself would leave the office at 5:30 to go home and have dinner with the family. And we tried to make sure that we had that we lived work-life balance, because it's just such a vital part of building a company to last. So starting from that sense of humanity, we also had built a growth mindset into the company. So Dave, when he arrived at SurveyMonkey, when he helped to acquire it from the founders and to start building the team down here in Silicon Valley, didn't know the subscription business very well. And SurveyMonkey is a subscription business, right? And the people he hired to lead analytics and growth and product and engineering were not experts at the subscription business. He built this wonderful kind of joyful sense of, we're going to learn it. Let's learn it, right? And so we became, over the course of several years of working together on this, really learning cohort analysis and learning the mechanics of how the business worked. and building the sense of confidence that, like, we can bring people in. They're not experts maybe yet in our business, but we know how to get really good at this. That really gets to, if there's one idea that's in my bag that I want to share, it's really, the word for this is growth mindset. Have any of you guys encountered Carol Dweck's work in this topic? Ever heard of growth mindset before? Yeah? It's interesting. I think my work at the San Francisco Friends School as a trustee and as a parent, that has also kind of animated an enormous kind of clarity on how to build lifelong learners, right? So I want to talk a little bit about that's really the number one kind of thing that I think carried us through in the immediate aftermath of losing Dave and of having to get back together, get it back together. We gathered back together as a leadership team, as the board did a CEO search for 2 months, at this moment where we needed clarity of execution and of decision-making around some issues in which the path was not clear, a reset of our enterprise business, M&A opportunities, making sure that we were on a growth path to hopefully get to a point where we might be able to do an IPO. The things that helped us kind of through were these traits that I didn't really have the language for it until it was really around that time that someone introduced me to Carol Dweck's work. A person from our strategy team who had been a research assistant to Professor Dweck, and it just clicked. And so if you haven't encountered this yet, if you boiled it down, a growth mindset is really about learning how to learn, and as opposed to and sort of finding ways to mine mistakes and errors for the learning opportunity. A fixed mindset in this simple construct is one where a failure is a fundamental verdict on your quality as a person. And often people who, and none of us are pure growth mindset or pure fixed mindset at any given time, but Professor Dweck's work really is about trying to cultivate the growth mindset side of things. I think there are a few points in which this manifests that are really important to highlight. So this is, again, a very personal comment, and everyone's mileage may vary here. If you are a student of leadership development, and many of us have gone through StrengthsFinder, for example. Anyone encounter that so far? So go to your strengths, and if I can sort of butcher it here, the notion is like find what you're really good at and just go all in on that strength. And if you have an area where maybe you're not so good, don't worry about that so much. Focus on the area that you're super strong at and become just like the ultra ninja at that one thing. From what I have read of in the growth mindset realm, it actually is a pretty profoundly kind of opposite notion to the core of StrengthsFinder. So for example, if you are trying to build resilience in yourself or in your team, for example, this colleague of mine put this in a way that stuck with me and rings in my ears even to this day. She was not a good presenter early in her career. She was extremely good as a quant and not a good presenter. And at the time, her management was like, you know what? Don't worry about trying to become a good presenter. Just be a good quant. And she did that for the next few years. And she realized that that was a barrier to her progressing in the context of her company. She said, you know what, I'm actually not going to take that advice. I'm going to learn how to become a good presenter. None of us arrives on this earth a good presenter or a good quant or a good strategist, right? My very personal advice, your mileage may vary. StrengthsFinder may be awesome for you, and if it works, that's great. But if I'm tempted to generalize, I would reject that notion, full stop, and say, hey, wait, I'm not yet a good presenter. What do I need to do to get there? Great. Each time, it takes a really thick skin, and go to, oh my gosh, what's the? Yes, thank you, Toastmasters. Go to Toastmasters. It's awesome. Although my brother did go to Toastmasters, he gave a toast at my wedding that was a disaster. But the good news is, he had a growth mindset, and he's kept going. He's gotten much better. I will have to, over drinks afterwards, I will tell you how bad the toast, it was really bad. So, okay, do any of you play a musical instrument? Hand. Yes. Is anyone a guitar player? Okay. All right. This is such a nerdy little pamphlet of a book with like the worst imagery I've really ever seen. Has anyone ever seen this book, by the way? Oh my gosh, it's so good. First Learn to Practice by Tom Heaney. He's this very experienced music educator. I picked up this book about 5 years ago as a guitar player, stumbled on it, and it has been life-changing. It's been sort of a roadmap to how to actually build a growth mindset and how to get, I wish I had encountered this in high school. I would be playing in, I would be the next Prince. I'm convinced. So first learn to practice, for example, it says, you know what? There is such a thing as playing around on your instrument, and that's great, and you should do that. And there's this other thing called practice, right? Being deliberate, picking a goal, setting a time frame, setting a deadline. How do you, slowing it down, learn the song in small chunks, right? Those sorts of things. Force yourself to get out and actually perform in front of people. Those very practical sorts of advice. This is one of the more powerful books that I have picked up, and it was interesting. I think it was toward the end of my SurveyMonkey time, and it's something that I definitely am carrying forward from that chapter. It's really, that kind of, we talked about this, strengths-based leadership. Don't do it. Okay, my grandfather, Clem, when he was trying out for the football team in college in 1932 in the Great Depression, his advice to my mom and her 4 sisters was make up your mind. Make up your mind. Just pick a thing that you want to go do and go do it. Paul Sappho here in Silicon Valley in the 80s put it a slightly different way that many of us have probably heard. Strong opinions weakly held. Has anyone encountered this? Peter Thiel writes about it in 0 to 1. Mark Andreessen has written about it. If you haven't encountered it yet, it's wonderful. This is another kind of roadmap to growth mindset, a sort of call to scientific inquiry. I apologize for the huge word cloud here. If you haven't bumped into strong opinions weakly held yet, if you haven't read The Hard Thing About Hard Things, for example. To me, one of the things that I love about this is it takes so much energy to go out and to disprove a hypothesis, to just gather the evidence you need, that you need to start with some conviction. Know that you'll be wrong. Know that you will go out and tear down that hypothesis. Don't worry about it. Commit to that hypothesis early, even more than you think it deserves. This particular piece, as we sort of plowed through the uncertainty after Dave's death and in terms of trying to continue SurveyMonkey's growth, to keep the team together, I wish I had encountered this earlier in my career, and so if the first time you're encountering it, I hope it is helpful to you. This is a little bit more personal. So language is leverage, and I think there's a lot of I've encountered a bunch of, if you've read Csikszentmihalyi about flow, or if you've read some of the George Lakoff stuff, it's very political writing, but it's fascinating in terms of helping to inform how the mechanics of our brains understand language. I want to illustrate this with a couple of examples. Again, to help reinforce the growth mindset, if you can de-escalate a scary change, you can use concepts like, you know what? Okay, have any of you guys ever tried to get your engineering teams to adopt Agile, for example? Okay. Anyone ever encountered objections to that idea? Ever? Okay. It's just a chat. We'll just try it. We're going to try it. It's a test. If it doesn't work, we can just revert and go back to doing the same things, keep making the same mistakes, or just a chapter. That's one helpful way to de-escalate what a potentially scary change. Has anyone ever encountered appreciative inquiry? Okay, all right, yes. Nice. Okay, I encountered as we hired and onboarded a new head of school at the independent school in San Francisco, and on whose board I sit. I encountered this for the first time. It's nerdy, I apologize, but it struck a chord. Don't conduct a postmortem unless it is an actual postmortem. Conduct a retrospective, right? Small, subtle thing. Again, try to avoid the traps of falling into more of a fixed mindset on this. These are linguistic tricks to maybe keep you in more on the growth mindset side. Instead of saying, what went well, what went badly, and then all the things that show up on the what went badly list, everyone's like shying away from it. Oh, no, it wasn't me. Or the person who gets put in that box, they feel super defensive and you are eroding a very important part of productivity and the team's growth mindset, which is psychological safety. I'll talk about that in a moment. What went well, what could have been better, is a linguistic trick to help keep you on the path of a growth mindset for your team. I think the other piece, I am a failed ski racer, and one of the training tricks or if you're a race car driver, they teach you this too. Look where you want to go, because target fixation is real, right? If you obsess over the lip of the jump, you miss the more important detail, which is the landing. Or if you look at the wall, you're going to hit the wall, right? So using target fixation in language like what went well, what could be better, it sounds ridiculously trivial. It's helpful. It's been helpful to my teams. So some of the work from Project Oxygen and Project Aristotle that the Google HR team did, I've found my way to this before Dave passed, and it verbalized for the first time concepts that I encountered, just bumped into on my own, that just made so much sense to me. Again, about how do you build that growth mindset for your team. The number one attribute of the most effective teams in the research that the Google HR team has done on the most effective teams there has been psychological safety. Evidence of that, for example, is if you're in a meeting around a table, conversational turn taking. If you see that the introverts in the room, the extroverts, people of any kind of background, if they feel safe to share, to take turn in a conversation, that's evidence that you've achieved a measure of psychological safety, which is a very important part of the more successful teams. That's not because I happen to work at YouTube now. This is something that these other attributes are also really important. I think the last piece is if you're not taking care of yourself, you can't take care of other people. So to help build your resilient team and keep it that way. I remember at the end of TripIt, super intense startup experience, about 20 pounds overweight, really stressed out, and I found that I made up my mind that I was going to learn how to be a bike commuter when I started at SurveyMonkey, and forced myself in the first 2 weeks to ride my bike from San Francisco to Palo Alto, which is crazy. And I found a community called SF2G, which gave me social pressure, a group of people where you say, hey, I'm gonna meet you at 5:55 a.m., and now all of a sudden I'm on the hook, and if I flake, then they're gonna be really mad, okay, then I'm gonna force myself to get out the door to meet them. And then Strava, those two things were they helped me completely kind of turn around what was a really bad fitness situation. And then the other thing is, like, we invest in our physical fitness and we don't invest in our emotional fitness. So see a shrink. As you get older, especially, this becomes more important. As you're navigating, trying to keep a marriage, if you have a family, those things are really hard. It's a heavy lift. See a shrink. Get help if you can, if you have the resources. Or use Headspace. And Randir, that's for you. So I think the last piece, and I want to wrap and sort of, I think minding your manners, helping when you talk to somebody who's just gone through a massive crisis or trauma, it's tempting to want to say, how can I help? Which is, the spirit of that is good, but that actually immediately puts a task on the person who is least equipped to handle a task right now. It can be better if you have good signal, if you're talking to a caregiver or to a victim of some kind of grievous situation, to just start helping. Just do something that's helpful. Be like, I'm at the grocery store, what do you need? Like, or if you see dirty dishes in the sink, just do them. Don't say, how can I help? So suggested reading, Carol Dweck, Project Oxygen, Nassim Nicholas Taleb's Fooled by Randomness, which is amazing. Option B, I mentioned up front. This is George Lakoff, Don't Think of an Elephant, that really talks about frames and is fascinating. It's very political. And then Season of the Witch, Ted Reingold's blog, which talks about how to, the etiquette and the cancer patient is so it's a little bit all over the place. It's personal. I do hope it's helpful just to kind of go through what's in my bag. I would love to answer any questions that you guys have. So this is my family up on Bernal Hill being weird. Sorry.
Cool to see that you learned how to play the guitar.
It's cool to see that you learned how to play the guitar. Notice there are no amplifiers on Bernal Hill at this moment, just to be clear. I'm actually curious, any questions, or actually, if any of you guys have any things that have helped you navigate through a, particularly charged part of, a chapter in your career that might be helpful for this crew.
Raise your hand and I'll bring you a mic.
Please, Nina.
Running.
Hello, my name's Nina. I'm an intern at eBay. I do UX research. And on the second week of my internship, there was a layoff at eBay. So that was unexpected. And I would say also kind of traumatic. It was my second week, and I was just kind of getting used to things. And suddenly, people were crying, people were hugging. I was helping people. Like someone that I had just met and had gone on a few walks with and had made plans to go to her Scrabble party, and suddenly I was just helping her carry her box out the door and into the car with her husband there, which was a lot more emotional than I had ever really imagined. I had read a lot about layoffs in the news, but I had never really experienced the emotional effect of being a part of what it means to go through a layoff. And I think something that helped carry me through was kind of going along the lines of growth mindset is learning to be flexible and kind to yourself. And like you said, no one is born knowing how to give a great speech or whatever the skill sets people think that they're amazing at. It all takes time to really grow. And I think just going through that time of adjustment and just being an intern and someone who's kind of just impatient to just kind of get started and get going and finally find a rhythm, just learning to be patient and to be flexible and keep your eyes open, I guess, to opportunities. Yeah.
That reminds me a lot of what my our VP of engineering for our team at YouTube in the days after had said this wonderful thing. For some people, and this is, I think, true of any kind of gnarly event like that, to kind of get back to normal as quickly as possible is a tendency that some people have. It's a way to feel safe again, right? It's a sort of return to normalcy. And that's not for everybody, right? So what John Harding said beautifully was we have normal on offer, and if you want to come back and have normal, we got it for you. And if you need time, to take care of yourself, do that. Take the time, right? And I think that's good advice to kind of, yeah. That I'm glad that you're here tonight. Yeah, it's good.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Lewis. I'm also an intern, interning as a product manager here on our survey tool, Seek tool. Shout out Seek.
Yes.
But my question
Survey
is
nerds.
regarding, so for me, I think I adopted a growth mindset early on in my life. And I think like adopting that is the easy part, but what I think the hard part is convincing someone else to adopt the growth mindset. So specifically, I was having a conversation with some interns the other day, and we were talking about, like, I think it's a weird example, but it fits, like, being, like, the richest person in the world. And, like, I feel like when you talk about that topic, people without a growth mindset automatically say, like, oh, no, that could never be, like, one of us. That could never be you. That could never be I. Because, you know, those people kind of just have that X factor. And for me, I'm like, you know, like, if you want to do it, then like, go ahead and try to do that. You know, not necessarily good advice, but it was very difficult trying to convince the other person to see it in a growth mindset lens. So my question is, like, how do you approach someone who doesn't have a growth mindset and someone who's stuck in the fixed mindset to kind of step away from that and see the other side, I guess?
Funny, I don't know that any of us is like purely growth mindset or fixed mindset, right? You know, and I think it's sort of, if you can find an example where like maybe a passion that person has, if they're like a guitar nerd, for example, and maybe they've mastered and gone from like I'm a super beginner to like maybe less of a beginner, you can sort of find, you can go to parts of that person's experience to sort of highlight, ways in which they might do that. That's sort of, when you're trying to convince your engineering team to adopt Agile, for example, like that's also a similar kind of, you try to find a common ground somewhere and then sort of move from that. I mean, I don't know if it's a very satisfying answer, but that's how I would sort of try to approach it.
I have an answer for that. You could show them a chart. So I think in that book you were talking about, she did a lot of psych research.
Yeah.
And I think I saw the charts in my psych class.
Yeah.
And I think she did a study on 5th graders, and there was a control group which didn't have there was no workshop, and so they represented kind of the fixed mindset, and then there was the growth mindset, and they had a workshop, and it basically proved that over time their test scores from the growth mindset increased, and then those from the fixed mindset was relatively stable over the year that the 5th graders were at. So engineers love graphs, right? And numbers. You could be like, and so my next point on this presentation of why.
There's a linguistic hack that the best teacher at our school uses, which is like appending the word yet. Like I can't solve this math problem yet. That's one way to sort of help, intervene in when someone's feeling a little bit trapped around a thing. In the back.
Yeah, hello. My name is Rakesh. I work for a stealth mode startup here. So I just saw about post-mortem analysis. I have no clue what it is. Can you explain just a little more details how different it is from retrospective with any example if you can?
It's the same. It's just a different word. That sort of, a postmortem is and again, your mileage may vary. If it's working for your team, do what works for your team, right? In my experience, you can get, if you use the word postmortem, it implies that someone has died.
Okay. Oh, so it's the same essentially.
It literally is after death.
Okay.
Somebody died, so we're all in big trouble, right?
Okay, yeah.
And so, and again, sometimes some people will be like, ugh, that's so, you're such a hippie, whatever, which is fine, I don't care, but I think a retrospective is reflect on what just happened, what can be better.
Okay.
what went well, try to lift up the things that somebody did well, like, oh, when we noticed that this thing was on fire, somebody put the fire out. Awesome. What could be better? How about the fire doesn't start next time? Ooh, that could be better,
Okay.
for example.
I
Right?
see. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
I'm sorry but so, it's like so ridiculously simplistic. It's like, wait, really? Is that all you're saying? But again, I think it's about how do you reinforce that sense of psychological safety around the table, and so that you get more candor, so that you get a more willingness to actually get to the heart of the matter, right? That's one of the reasons why those small linguistic differences can actually have a big outcome, a big effect. John.
Hey, Will. One question I had for you is, as you personally experience these things, could you talk about the effect and perhaps some of the healing that your family or your friends provided as you were going through this?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, totally. A lot of us, so I think it was really important. So it was important for me just to kind of go on a mountain bike ride after, and to kind of connect and just try to get. So I went for a ride with my friend Rob. We just climbed Mount Tam and tried to burn off some of the stress and some of the and just hearing from everybody, are you okay? The day of the shooting was a silver lining, right? To hear from so many old friends and from my family and such. That was sort of just a little burst of healing right away. And then, people, super fortunate to have, we've just a lot. I have 8 brothers and sisters too. So it was actually sort of crazy, too much, right? But it was welcome. And I think, what's interesting, and I think this is true for people, whether you've just had a kid, there's often or you've just gone through something really gnarly, some kind of a crisis, often there's a surge of support, and then it fades. And I think often those who are most thoughtful will show up after the kind of wave has receded, right? And come in. So often, after you're 3 months into after you've had your first kid and you don't know which way is up. I don't know if any of you guys have had kids before. When the person who shows up with a meal at 90 days in plus, gold star, thank you. And that's true, I think, for anybody who's healing from something hard, right? At least in my experience. Yeah. Yes. Hi.
Hello, my name is Ginger. So my question is around a lot of what you have shared seems to be based on when the team still has a lot of faith in you and still has a lot of trust in you. Have you ever seen a situation where a senior leader in the company or the team has lost trust from people below? Maybe, I don't know, people maybe question their integrity or capability of leading a team. In that situation, how do you still keep the team working well towards a good goal? Have you have any experience around that? Thanks.
That's such a great question, and I can't really give an answer. I am so fortunate in that most of my career experiences have been just, some of them have been really hard, but generally positive. And but I've also encountered situations like that. And yeah, just being on video is probably not the right moment to kind of share an answer to that question. I would love to talk with you about that after, though. Yeah, I'm really curious. I mean, often if you're in a situation where, that's sort of a governance thing where the board doesn't necessarily run the company, right? But if you have a senior leader who is failing to meet the requirements of their job, I think that there are specific, it takes, often you don't feel safe to kind of go to the board, especially if the board happens to be really close to, if you're talking about the CEO, right? I mean, anyway, we can talk about that more offline. Yeah. That's it. I don't know if have you guys ever experienced that situation? Anybody here? I'm sure like the collective experience in the Products That Count community is amazing. I don't know if any of you guys feel like you can protect the innocent or, yeah. I don't know, SC, I'm sure you may have some good answers to that question. I don't know. Okay. Yes.
Hi, my name is Monisha. I was wondering, how did you find you had to support your team after these moments of crises? Because I'm sure it's hard enough taking care of yourself. So.
What was interesting, Phil Ludwig, one of our amazing designers at SurveyMonkey, who a really senior designer, had been with the team for 5-6 years, just a rock, so good. And the month after David passed, Phil said, "I'm out." And I was gutted again. I think that's another thing that often happens, like when a big traumatic event happens, the thing you don't necessarily expect is like, well, as people work through it and process it, they're going to come to different, at a different pace. So you have to expect there'll be second order effects in the weeks, months, or even, quarters after. So in Phil's case, I think the reminder that we all took from this is that life is very short, it's fleeting. If you have a thing that you really need to go do it, because you don't know if you're going to have the chance to do it. Phil wanted to go pursue fine art painting, and he did. So I think supporting the team in that moment was like, at first sort of like, oh, okay, this is not about me, this is not about the rest of the SurveyMonkey, and like you're being disloyal or whatever. This is like, Phil, that is awesome, you are making Dave proud. You are like, have given so much to this company. You need to go and do this next chapter. So supporting him, and I think that did a couple things. A, it was just good in the moment as a human thing. It also just projected to the rest of the team that like, it's not a taboo, this is okay, like do what you need to do. Because if you stick around out of some weird sense of duty and kind of don't really want to be there and you end up not performing you're taking a seat that could be filled by somebody amazing. So in Phil's case, it was, yes, short-term disruptive to the team, but it made room for another person to step up and to lead our mobile design team, which is like a huge, amazing job to take, and it gave progression for somebody else on the team. That was a surprising, you find pockets of resilience in the team and the sort of, some people say, I'm out, but that gives room for growth for the other people who are there. The other piece is, I left after, I was there for the year after Dave died. Xander came in as full-time CEO. Xander's amazing. He needed a new team around him. I was done, after 5 years, and after that, particularly that fifth year between when Dave passed and when Xander was fully on board. And it was the right time to go. So I think that's the other thing. Sometimes resilience, it doesn't necessarily mean like, oh, like I'm going to stay and like martyr myself to this thing, right? It's very freeing when a human event like that happens. It just reminds you like you have to kind of do, what's right for you. Okay.
Hi, Jay.
Hi, Jay.
Thank you so much for sharing tonight. I was, a lot of things came, but one question based off of that last one, actually, that I'm really curious to maybe get more of a sense for is, having that kind of perspective, that new perspective of going through a major tragedy and really, connecting with our common humanity. What were some of the things that were happening in the company just before then that seemed really important, that after this event happened, that it's like, why were we so concerned about that, or why was that such high priority, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, we were mentioned that we'd spun up a new effort to build an enterprise business with a sales team going out to customers. A very different way of going to market than what SurveyMonkey typically has done. And as usually happens, the first hypothesis you have is wrong. And we had gotten enough evidence to know that it was wrong, and we had to change it. And that was going to be really disruptive. And we were kind of like about to get to a point where we could make a decision and chart a path forward and a big strategic pivot. around that business, involving layoffs, involving, I mean, big changes. And you know what? We were like, nope, back burner. And it wasn't until, it was almost a year. It was like 9 months later that we finally, we were in a fortunate position, right, where SurveyMonkey is an extremely profitable business, and you know, we were under circumstances that allowed us, that gave us flexibility. That, you know, for example, in my startup between CNET and Yahoo, we didn't have that kind of flexibility, right? But yeah, so that was an example where fortunate circumstances afforded us the ability to be more humanistic about how we kind of tackled this. But yeah, that was one example of something that yeah, it made sense to just hold off and return when we had kind of had a new leader in place and we had all the conditions set so we could execute well. And happily we have. SurveyMonkey has continued to thrive.
Do you think there's do you think there's hope in like instilling, you know, like maybe some kind of practices or something in the company where like you can get that kind of perspective, you know, without that kind of a disruption?
Yeah, absolutely. Growth mindset, because building things is hard.
Mindset.
It's stressful,
Okay.
right? It's like these teams. You know, there's like interpersonal dynamics. It's messy, right? But if you can use some of these linguistic hacks, you know, use some of the systematic ways to build, to make it okay to have small failures and kind of, you know, move quickly. Those are some ways to just build resilience into your teams. So I think you don't have to go through like, and I wish each of you guys all luck and that you don't have to encounter these kinds of hardships. When you do, I hope that you can plot it through, and I hope I can learn from you when you give your talk. So,
Well, thank you very much.
thank you, SC. Thank you, guys. Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
That's awesome.